Hey, so I wanted to make a video talking about influence in Civ 7, which should have released officially today. Influence is a new system in Civ 7 that allows you to interact with other players and city-states in the game in a way that's really different from Civ 6 or any of the other games in the series. And the reason why I decided to make a video on this is because in the meta that's evolving in multiplayer so far, people have realised how incredibly strong influence is. The game's only really been played since Friday, which is 5 days ago now, or multiplayer's been getting played since Friday. And in that time, people have quickly realised that the best civs in the game, barring a few other ones which are just broken for other reasons, are the civs with extra influence and that can do things better with influence. So what actually is influence and what is it you can do with it? So it's a point system, almost like science or culture. You just accumulate it. You start with 10 per turn, though you can increase that quite significantly just by picking a different civ, using mementos, picking a different leader. And this guide will pretty much just focus on the Antiquity Age because that's where the majority of the games in multiplayer are being played and being decided, and that's when you're getting your head start and getting ahead of everybody else if you're playing a longer game as well. So you start with 10 per turn, and there's a few ways to increase it. One is simply by just playing the Greek civilization. So Greece just gives you a flat +3 here. And Greece also gives you access to the Parthenon, which is a building which gives you +2 influence as well, which is really strong. Being able to just get this extra up immediately is very handy because it means if, for instance, you meet a city-state early, you can just become friends with it before anybody else even accumulates enough influence to do so. And in terms of the leaders, I think there's 3 that are just far and away better than everything else right now. And that is the Benjamin Franklin, which is the American leader, Harriet Tubman, another American leader, and then Machiavelli. And these 3 leaders in particular, if we go back through them, well, why do these ones work so well with influence? So Benjamin Franklin, it's these 2 specific bonuses here, though his other 2 bonuses are good as well. But this one here, so he gets basically an extra science per age for active endeavours, which means if you send out a scientific endeavour early, you're just getting 7 science immediately, and you can run 2 of them at the same time. So you can technically, if you have the influence for it, and if you meet someone 2 players early enough, you can get an additional 14 science per turn, which is just crazy strong. What are endeavours? I will cover this in a bit, but essentially this guy can just run 2 projects instead of 1. Everyone else is limited to 1 at the same time. Harriet Tubman, she gets 100% influence towards initiating espionage actions. Basically it just means half cost espionage. This is just a spy mechanic. The difference between the spy mechanic in this and in previous games is this just works 100% of the time. If you're spying on someone, it will succeed every single time. And the most effective ones you can do are stealing technologies in civics. So if you can just constantly run stealing technologies in civics, espionage actions, then you're just obtaining a free tech and a free civic every 7 turns, and you're doing it for half cost, which in online speed is barely anything. You can do it constantly and it costs nearly nothing. This civ also has some very strong other bonuses. You can't really be declared on because you gain 5 war support on all wars declared against you, which means you can play incredibly greedy. And also this movement bonus is quite nice as well. So this is possibly the best civ in the game. Maybe not quite, but it's definitely like top tier right now. And then the third one is another civ that's incredibly strong, which is Machiavelli. So he gets 3 influence per turn as well. If you combine him with Greece, you're just making 16 influence from the start of the game. And he also has 50 gold per age when your diplomatic action proposals are accepted, or 100 gold when they're rejected. Most of the time people are just going to accept it, especially if you're playing multiplayer, which just means you can just immediately send out one of these diplomatic actions and just make 50 gold, which is very helpful. He also has really nice bonuses around formal wars. You can just declare on someone and not have to worry about the usual lack of war support you get when declaring a formal war in Civ 7. And this levy bonus is not bad as well, because you have so much influence it could possibly be quite useful. So the leaders themselves, you have 3 that are really quite standout compared to the rest of them. And as well as that, you have mementos, which the multiplayer community hasn't really decided yet if we're not playing with them or if we are playing with them. As of right now, there's some that are way too strong, so in general we're just banning them. But if we look at the mementos, there's some that are very obviously good for this sort of playstyle, which is the Treaty of Kadesh, which is +1 diplomatic attribute point. You can immediately put this into the diplomatic tree, which will give you +1 influence per turn, and it will additionally open up a bunch of other strong ones when you get your next diplomatic attribute point. The other memento is the bifocals, which are incredibly strong. Gain 50 influence after researching a tech or civic mastery. Tech or civic mastery in this game is just the secondary part of the tech. There's a lot of them, so bifocals is just really, really good. Like, this one seems kind of broken as well when you combine it with these leaders that get a lot of extra influence, which they can then use to steal techs and civics. So it kind of feeds right back into it and refunds you some. So yeah, incredibly strong. And then the next few things I want to focus on before we actually load into the game and like look at this in practice is there are actually a few leaders in the game that have unique endeavours and sanctions. Endeavours are just a positive and sanctions are a negative aspect that you basically just apply to another civilization in the game. And what they do can vary greatly, but there's kind of a little bit of a pattern when you look at them. But there are a few civs that actually have unique ones, which we'll just quickly look at right now. And those civs are Ibn Battuta, which you can see here. He has the unique endeavour called trade maps that allow you to gradually see other leaders' explored areas. This is really, really bad, and also once I explain something else, you'll kind of realise that this is almost a nerf having this ability. On top of that, we have Lafayette, who has the unique endeavour called Reform, which grants an additional social policy slot. Supporting this endeavour also grants the other leader an additional social policy slot. This is really good, obviously. Social policy slots are very strong, and if you can get them up early, that's really good. This is not a nerf for the reason I'll explain in a wee minute as well. And then the third one is Himiko, and she has a unique endeavour called Friend of Way, which can be used in an alliance to grant you and your ally 25% science. I mean, that seems good. Probably much better in the late game. In the early game, like a research research endeavour is just better because 6 science is at the start of the game an extra 60% science. Obviously, it won't stay that way for long, but this will get a lot better as the game goes on, basically. But at the start, it's not that good. So yeah, the next thing I wanted to cover is possibly something that I've not really seen anybody else talk about, but I noticed when I was playing the game that on some civs you seem to have different sanctions and endeavours than others, and I didn't really see a pattern. I wasn't sure if it was linked to civilizations or if it was linked to leaders, but what I quickly realised when I was starting to map them all out is that there's actually a very easy way to work this out, and it's based entirely, if we go back to the first guy, on your traits here. I think these are called. So you have an economic and militaristic traits for your leader, and every single leader in the game has different traits. And what this means is that your endeavours and your sanctions will correspond to your traits. So for instance, an economic militarist is going to have the military aid endeavour as well as the Hinder Military Production sanction. They're also going to have the open markets endeavour, and they're going to have the Hinder Finances sanction. So you always basically get 4 unique projects, 2 of which are positive, 2 of which are negative, that you can put against another player, and they're always just going to be based off this. Now, going back to Ibn Battuta and why this civ is actually kind of worse than you might think, he has this expansionist wildcard. What this means is that he gets the trade maps as an endeavour, but he doesn't have a second sanction. There's no corresponding second sanction that this guy gets. So all he gets actually is the trade maps, which is useless, and then he has the expansionist endeavours and sanctions, and those are the farmers market and the, let me check this actually, the farmers market and the Hinder Agriculture. So these are basically food-based ones, which those ones are actually quite good because they allow you to grow quicker, which is really strong in this game, but they're not that good at the start of the game because they only apply to your towns, which basically just means this guy doesn't really get to do anything good early with his influence. You just want to probably use it in city-states immediately. So, in terms of picking your civ, if you know you're going to war in the game, you cannot not be playing a civ that has a militaristic bonus, because you're essentially just giving up combat strength. That's what the military bonus does, and we'll go through each one individually and talk about what it does. But when you're picking your civ, this is actually incredibly important. Or picking your leader, sorry. This is very important. For instance, if you have a scientific trait, you immediately can get 6 science when you meet another player, which is really strong. If you just end up with something like the diplomatic is probably not that good. This one just gives you happiness. And for instance, the farmer's market, it can be okay, but if you're not going to build many towns, it's not very good. If you don't want a war and you have a military leader, you're just giving up a sanction and an endeavour again. So the entire time you're picking your civ, you should be taking into account what these traits are, because it's actually very important. And yeah, as I said, if you're planning on fighting and you don't have a militaristic leader, you cannot use that up to 3 combat strength bonus you would be getting, which is very, very bad, because you're just giving up 3 combat strength. If you think back to Civ VI, being 3 combat strength on something like Black Queen was in itself a strong bonus. If you're not picking a militaristic civ and you're fighting, you're essentially giving up the same combat bonus as you would be if you were fighting against Black Queen in Civ VI, which is really bad. Right. There's a few more things I want to cover, and then I'm going to load into a game. The last thing I want to cover is Napoleon, Emperor. He has a unique sanction called Continental System that reduces the trade route limit of the leader that you target by 1. And this does it to all leaders. So this is kind of... It doesn't quite look as strong as it was when we first saw this ability before we were actually playing the game, simply because a lot of the time you're only going to have a few traders and it doesn't really cost that much to get more. Like, it's just a bit of influence. It doesn't really cost you like a market slot like it did in Civ 6. So this isn't quite as strong as I thought, but it's probably quite annoying if someone repeatedly does it to you. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, it's not quite as broken as I first thought it might be. In addition to this, there's also a wonder in the game that gives you another unique endeavour, the Ginseng Agreement, which comes from the Emile Bell wonder, which we'll look at once we load into the game for a second. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to load into the game and actually look at how these work in practice, and on top of that I'm going to explain the various different ones. So there's 6 endeavours and there's 6 sanctions in the game.
The people
the
gather
base
together,
sanctions and base endeavours, that is, ignoring the unique ones we've covered already.
Law, envisaging how to build a Greece that will
essentially
last
they're
for
based
ages.
on happiness, gold, military, food, culture and science. And what you actually get for each of them is not the same depending on what resource you get. So I'm loading into a game I just played where I've already met a few players, and I'm playing as Charlemagne, which I decided to pick because I think he has the best endeavours in the game, or he's one of the leaders that has the best endeavours in the game. So if we click on another player, we can go here and we can see we have the research and military collaborations. If we had a look at his leader profile, we would see he was a scientific and military traded leader. So what this means is, if I just send both of these, this is costing me 60 favour to do both, I get 3 combat strength on all my units if this gets accepted, and I get 6 signs per turn if this gets accepted. Now, these numbers don't stay the same for all the agreements. So the 642 system applies for open markets, which is gold, culture exchange, which is culture obviously, and research collaboration, which is science. But the other ones actually don't apply like this. For instance, local festival, if it gets supported, you get 3. If it gets accepted, you get 2, and the person accepting it gets 2 influence per turn instead. Military aid, you can see it right here. If it gets supported, you both get 3 combat strength. If it gets accepted, you get 2 combat strength, and the other player gets 2 gold per turn. And then farmers market. Farmers market works quite differently in that it applies food to your towns only, and it gives you 3 food if supported, 2 food if accepted, and 2 gold to the other player if accepted. And hopefully I will put a little graphic up on the screen showing all these. And it's much the same for the sanctions. Hinder Finances gives minus 10% gold, Hinder Military Production, plus 20% unit cost, Hinder Public Morale, minus 10% happiness, Hinder Agriculture, minus 20% food, Hinder Civic Study, minus 10% culture, Hinder Research, minus 10% science. I think the strongest of these is just going to be the Hinder Agriculture. If you can put that on someone early, it is going to really mess up their game if they have minus 20% food. In addition to that, if you just put minus 10% culture to someone who doesn't have very much culture, it is really going to mess up their game a little bit, just being that bit slower. If you know you're going to have to fight someone all game long, having minus 10% science means you might just be able to beat them to horses by like an extra turn or 2, which might allow you to win the game. So these are quite strong, but I think Endeavours are just a bit stronger because they give you more of a bonus than sanctions hurt the other players. In addition to this, we also have city-states, which you can befriend for 85. There are ways to get this way down. I believe Greece has a bonus to befriending city-states. It has a unique card that allows you to reduce this, and there's also within the diplomatic attribute tree, there is a minus 50% diplomatic attribute card, though that's quite deep in the tree if I seem to remember. It's like 2 or 3 in, so you might not be able to get that up quite as early as you would like to. So, in terms of sending these out, what it looks like when you send one out is you send it to a player. Obviously I'm playing against the AI here. She's accepted this now, which means now we're going to be getting an extra 6 signs per turn, just to look at it in practice. And yep, it's updated now. We're now making 17 signs instead of 11. Let's also see if we can send her a military aid. And she's fully accepted that, which means we now get 3 combat strength extra each. I don't think it will let me show, so let me just roll over return this turn, and then it should show me the extra military strength if we hover. Yep. You can see the +2 military aid. So we can see she didn't actually support it, she just accepted it here, which is fine. The AI likes doing that a lot, but if you're playing against proper humans, they will generally just support it if they have enough influence. And so befriending independents is something you probably want to do right away if you meet one quickly. For instance here, in my position, I'd probably befriend this one. Purple CSs are very strong, and I would probably kill either this one or both of these. Military CSs are not so great right now. I think Science and Purple CS are the 2 best ones, but let's not get too into that right now. So, the other thing I wanted to cover as well is the ginseng agreement, which you can get from this wonder right here. The Mastery Code of Laws Civic, you need to get it, and it's the Emile Bell wonder. Gain a unique diplomatic endeavour called Ginseng Agreement that grants food to both leaders' capitals, +1 diplomatic attribute point. So this is a pretty good wonder. But the problem with this is it works very differently to the farmer's market. What this does is it just gives 6 food to both of your caps, and it gives 4 food if they accept it, and 2 food to them if they accept it. So it works more like a research collaboration in terms of the numbers, but it only applies to your capital. So it's very easy to see that if you have 3 towns or more, you're actually just getting more food doing a farmer's market. If you've got 2 towns, you're getting the same amount of food. But you have to build a wonder to get this. And in addition to that, it's going to take you a while to get this up. Possibly this could be good with Benjamin Franklin if you have loads of influence, because he can run 2 projects of any type at once, as I mentioned before. But other than that, I'm not sure this will be that strong. It seems like it's basically roughly as strong as the farmer's market. Maybe if you have a spawn where you have no food, it can be good, but right now, I would say most of the unique endeavours and sanctions are not worth running. The only one that seems really strong is Lafayette's reform ability. So, hopefully that should explain why you use influence in this game and why it's so strong. So, from the very start of the game, you're accumulating influence. You can increase this by putting diplomatic attribute points into the tree. You can increase this by picking specific civs. You can increase this by picking specific leaders. And if you're playing a leader that can utilize this better than others, such as Lafayette, such as Ben Franklin, Harriet Tubman, Machiavelli, you're just going to be able to start using this immediately to just get yourself ahead of other players. And the problem with this whole system so far is there's no real counter to it. You cannot stop someone just repeatedly spying on you, repeatedly putting down your influence, and repeatedly putting down your combat strength, and taking over city-states that are near you before you can get to them. There's so many strong parts to this that right now, I think every single strong civ in the game, near enough, other than Isabella and a few others, is just a civ that gets a bunch of influence for free and can use it more efficiently. So, take that into account when you're picking your civ. Remember to look at your leader attributes. If you want to war, you need a military leader. If you want to get science up quickly, you need to have a scientific leader. And you can use and abuse this to basically become way ahead of anybody else much quicker. You can get your culture to 16 per turn the minute you meet someone. If you have a culture leader, you can get your science to 16 per turn the minute you meet someone as a scientific leader. And yeah, taking this into account should just allow you to play much, much better. Thank you.